Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed Chief Guest Dr. V. Jyoti Prakash, respected President Dr. Zahir Kazi, Office Bearer of Anjuman Islam, Conference Chair, educators, and participants from around the world. I extend a warm welcome to the inaugural program of the International Conference on Innovative Teaching and Exuberant Learning. I am Professor Sheikh Abu Sufyan, convener of this international conference and host for this momentous occasion. Today, we gather here to celebrate the power of education, the incredible potential of innovative teaching, and the joy of exuberant learning. This conference, which is organized by Center of Innovative Teaching and Exuberant Learning of i-CiTeL Technical Campus under Internal Quality Assurance Cell and IST Faculty Chapter, serve as a platform for sharing ideas, experiences, and best practices that will shape the future of education. As Nelson Mandela once said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Through education, we unlock the limitless potential residing within every individual, empowering them to flourish, succeed, and make a positive impact on the society. To commence the formal inaugural program of this conference, in line with the tradition of Anjuman Islam, I will recite and translate a few verses from Holy Quran. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. The translation of this first revelation of Surah Al-Alaq is, recite in the name of your Lord who created a man from a clinging substance. Recite, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught you by the pain, taught the man that which he not knew. Moving forward, it is my privilege to introduce our esteemed conference chair and director of the campus, Dr. Ramzan Khatib. This conference, which is aimed to empower the educators with innovative teaching practices, was conceptualized under his guidance. As a proud member of this technical campus, I can attest that Dr. Ramzan Khatib is a leader who has fostered the development of vibrant team at our campus. Now, without further ado, I kindly request our director, Dr. Ramzan, to deliver the opening remark for today's inaugural session. It is over to you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Abu Sufyan Sheikh. Distinguished Chief Guest, Dr. Jyoti Prakash, Dr. Zahir Kazi, President Anjuman Islam, and all office bearer of Anjuman Islam, heads of institutions of Anjuman Islam, keynote speakers, conference chair, and participants from India and various countries, a very warm good morning to everyone. On behalf of Anjuman Islam Kalsekar Technical Campus, i-KTC, I extend a warm welcome to all the delegates and participants attending the 3 days International Conference on Innovative Teaching and Exuberant Learning, organized by i-KTC, New Panvel, Navi Mumbai, Maharashtra. i-KTC has established the Center for Innovative Teaching and Exuberant Learning with the purpose of exploring innovative pedagogies and tools in the teaching learning process to achieve excellence in quality education by obtaining accreditation like NAAC and NBA. Today, I am excited to witness these remarkable initiatives by the center, which not only benefit our own teachers, but also extend its reach by organizing an international level conference, benefiting participants across the country and worldwide. This program is well coordinated efforts to create an ecosystem that encourages participation, foster the sharing of innovative ideas, and provide networking opportunities for teachers. I would like to express my gratitude to the core team of the Center for Innovative Teaching and Exuberant Learning, the Internal Quality Assurance Cell IQAC, and all the faculties and staff members involved for their commendable efforts in organizing this conference. Furthermore, we are immensely grateful to the management of Anjuman Islam for their support and valuable guidance. This conference promises to be an enriching experience, offering a platform for educators to collaborate, exchange ideas, and contribute to the advancement of innovative teaching practices. I am sure this conference will inspire the participant and ignite the path toward the exuberant learning. My best wishes for grand success of this conference. Thank you. Over to you, Professor Abu Sufyan Sheikh.
Thank you, sir, for your inspiring opening remark. Your words has truly set the stage for an enlightening conference that will undoubtedly explore new dimension in teaching and learning. Moving forward, now I request the conference co-chair and Dean of School of Engineering and Technology, Dr. Rajendra Magar, to introduce and invite the chief guest for today's inaugural program, Dr. V. Jyoti Prakash.
Thank you, Professor Abu Sufyan. Am I audible, Professor Abu Sufyan?
Yes, absolutely audible, sir.
Thank you, thank you. President of Anjuman Islam, Dr. Zahir Kazi, sir. Honorable General Secretary Akil Hafiz, sir. Honorable Treasurer Moiz Miyajawala, sir, and other honorable members of Anjuman Islams, all the heads of the institutions, keynote speakers, and all the participants of this international conference. It's a privilege and honor for me today to introduce today's chief guest, Dr. V. Jyoti Prakash. Dr. V. Jyoti Prakash is currently working as a professor of Civil Engineering Department, Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. Sir's main areas of research interests include water resources, engineering system, reservoir sedimentation, stochastic modeling, water management, genetic algorithm, genetic programming, artificial intelligence, artificial neural network, and so on. Sir has authors more than 126 research papers in refereed peer-reviewed journals and more than 236 conference papers, and he has received 6 best paper awards for his paper published in various journals. Sir has guided more than 16 PhD students and 31 master's theses. So Dr. Jyoti Prakash has carried out 15 major research projects in water resources planning, management, and application of artificial intelligence in water resources. Sir has got prestigious awards to grace his profession, like Young Engineer Award in 2004 by Indian National Academy of Engineers, ISTE SGSIT National Award for Young Researcher, and ISRE Maharashtra State National Award by Indian Society for Technical Education, Career Award for Young Teacher by All India Council of Technical Education, New Delhi, IIT Bombay's Dr. P.K. Patwardhan Technological Development Award, R.J. Garde Research Award in 2013 by Indian Society for Hydraulics. Sir has also got IRCC Industrial Impact Award in 2012 for his contribution in the research and consultancy. Sir is working as an associate editor for very valuable American Society for Civil Engineering journals like ASC Hydraulic Journal, ASC Journal of Hydraulics, and so on. Sir is fellow member of 3 societies and 13 national and 7 international societies. Apart from being an integral part of organization like IIT Bombay, he is a technical advisor for more than 10 corporations, member of various technical committees constituted by the government of Maharashtra and government India. He has made several research collaborations with other universities and delivered more than 120 invited talks. Sir, on behalf of Anjuman Islams, we truly appreciate and sincerely convey our thanks for accepting our invitation as a chief guest in very, very short notice. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Professor Abu Sufyan.
Now I request our chief guest V. Jyoti Prakash sir to deliver his chief guest address, sir.
Yeah.
Sir.
Thank you. Thank you for a very good introduction, Dr. Magar. Thank you, and thanks for the institute for giving me this opportunity to share the dais with Kazi sir second time. Last time it was your institute inaugural convocation. Thank you very much. I think it's very interesting to note that Anjuman Islam College is organizing this very unique international conference. So formally, I thanks everyone, and I thank President of Anjuman Islam, Dr. Zahir Kazi sir, Director Dr. Ramzan, Principal Dr. Magar, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed participants and distinguished guests, I'm deeply honored to address you as the chief guest of this esteemed online international conference on innovative teaching and exuberant learning. I am glad to witness such a global gathering of passionate educators committed to redefining education, and we are all part of such gathering now, especially after the pandemic. Innovation in teaching methods and fostering the learning experiences have become more crucial than ever before. See, as we gather here today, let us embrace the power of technology and digital tools to enhance learning outcomes. The online environment offers unique opportunities for collaborative and education. The physical boundaries and reaching learning across the globe is now slowly vanishing. By fostering student-centered approaches, encouraging critical thinking, and nurturing a love of lifelong learning, we can prepare our students to thrive in the digital age. Let us prioritize creativity, problem solving, and adaptability, equipping our leaders, our learners with the skills they need to shape the bright future. I commend the organizers for their dedication and unwavering commitment in promoting innovative teaching practices. Their efforts in curating an enriching conference program and fostering global collaboration are commendable. I encourage each of you to actively engage in the conference session, network with fellow Let us leverage this online platform to exchange ideas, challenge existing norms, and collectively envision the future of education. In conclusion, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to the organizers, participants for organizing this online conference. Not but least, see, nowadays we are preparing a large number of students in both engineering and other course of streams. They are very, very knowledgeable in the technology of communication, right? So we are now having a better way to communicate what we have learned. But how much the students have learned, that is becoming a questionable. Even we say that the way in which we have been educated in older days when these online methods of educations are not available, the teachers have imparted us a large chunk of knowledge than what. Let us get a good solution for this so that we prepare a student who can face the real world with confidence. I wish all the best. Together, let us forge ahead, embracing innovation and creating a future where teaching and learning inspire joy, curiosity, and lifelong growth. Thank you, and I wish you a productive and transformative conference experience to one and all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. V. Jyoti Prakash, for your inspiring chief guest address. I'm sure, as you mentioned, this conference will help participants to get diverse skill as needed for 21st century teachers. Now, I kindly request the conference co-chair and Dean of School of Pharmacy, Dr. Sharik Syed, to introduce and invite the respected President of Anjuman-e-Islam, Dr. Zahir Kazi, for the official release of conference proceeding. Following this, we eagerly anticipate Dr. Kazi presidential remark. Dr. Sharik, it is over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Abu Sufyan. Am I audible properly, sir?
Yes, sir, you're absolutely
okay. So thank you so much. It is truly an honor and pleasure for me to be inviting and welcoming Dr. Zahir Kazi, the President of Anjuman-e-Islam, who's an eminent educationist and a practicing radiologist. Dr. Zahir Kazi is a consulting radiologist and sonologist who is affiliated with leading Mumbai's hospitals. He's been trained internationally in US. Dr. Zahir Kazi, under his leadership, for more than 2 decades of service at Anjuman has tremendously grown leaps and bounds. As a testament of that, Anjuman was recently awarded the Sir Syed Excellence Award by Aligarh Muslim University. He himself, for his contribution to education, has been awarded by several foundations, most recently as an icon of change and included among the 101 influential Prabhavashali personalities of state of Maharashtra. He's been awarded by several foundations such as Ekta Foundation and Seva Foundation for his work and service in the field of medicine and education. Dr. Zahir Qazi sits on several government bodies which provide information, we provide directions and provide guidances to the government bodies, especially for the work in minorities and education. He is also a member of National Level Curriculum Design Committee. The work of that has directly influenced national education policy. Dr. Zahir Qazi, as Anjuman celebrates 150 years, he is taking Anjuman on a global front for exploration and expansion. Under his leadership, Anjuman has established Overseas Friends of Anjuman chapter in the United States and plan to expand it to the global other countries. In addition, he was recently invited by Harvard for a talk to explain and showcase what Anjuman has been for the 150 years. He's also recently visited UN and also Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And as an outcome of that, Anjuman has signed a historic memorandum of understanding with Massachusetts Institute of Technology for collaboration in different spheres of work. As he moves ahead for his expansion, it is truly an honor and pleasure for me to be welcoming Dr. Zahir Qazi for this international conference. Sir, I invite you for your presidential remark and also the release of conference briefing. Over to you, sir.
Very good morning, all the participants and the chief guest of today's conference. I'm told we have participants from 7 countries and 3 different states of India. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to welcome to the 3 days international conference on innovative teaching and exuberant learning, hosted by Anjuman Islam Kalsikar Technical Campus at Panvel in India. We are indeed delighted to invite you to witness the pinnacle of modernity and technological advancement in education at Anjuman Islam's Kalsikar Technical Campus, situated in Navi Mumbai. EIKTC stands as a testament to the visionary ideas and relentless efforts of Anjuman Islam, a renowned educational and social organization established 50 years ago in the year 1874. Notably, Anjuman Islam was honored with the esteemed Sir Syed Excellence National Award by Aligarh Muslim University on the virtual celebration of Sir Syed Day, held on 17th of October 2020. This prestigious recognition highlights our unwavering commitment to the education excellence and our dedication to fostering an enriching ecosystem. We have also established partnerships with leading universities worldwide, such as MIT USA and the University of Westminster UK, through Memorandum of Understanding. Today we come together to embark on a transformation journey. This conference has been meticulously curated to unveil the hidden treasures of innovative teaching pedagogies, crucial for nurturing 21st century educators. Our goal is to redefine the boundaries of teaching and learning, empowering educators to shape the future with creativity, passion, and enthusiasm. With immense enthusiasm, I extend my heartfelt wishes to each and every one of you. May this educational conference serve as a catalyst for meaningful and fruitful endeavors, propelling us towards a future of knowledge, growth, and limitless possibilities. Let us seize this moment, embrace innovation, and ignite a flame that will illuminate the path of education for generations to come. Anjuman, during its 150 years of journey, has given some of the brilliant citizenaries, not to India, but global citizens. It will strive to continue so. And Anjuman was also a part of brainstorming for the new education policy that we had today. I welcome all of you and hope that you will contribute immensely in creating innovative teaching and exuberant learning. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful presidential remark. Now I request you to officially declare opening of this conference and release of conference proceeding. Meanwhile, my technical team, Dr. Rohan, please share the screen.
I shared the screen, sir. Is it visible?
Yes, it is visible. Sir,
I
please.
take, I take immense pleasure to announce the opening of today's conference and wish all of you the very best.
Thank you, sir, for your presidential remark and also for officially opening this conference. Our heartfelt gratitude goes out to also to the all office bearer of Anjuman Islam, the esteemed chief guest of today's program, and all the special invitees for gracing this inaugural ceremony. With the formal inaugural program now concluded, we will now proceed to our highly anticipated keynote sessions of the first day. Continuing with this program, I would like to extend an invitation to Dr. Rajendra Magar, the Dean of School of Engineering and Technology, who has played a vital role as one of the key curator of this conference. Before Dr. Rajendra Magar take the charge of the screen for the keynote session, I would like to provide you with important instructions to ensure an optimal learning experience and an active participant engagement. Firstly, I request all the participants to actively engage throughout the session. Stay attentive, take notes, and make the most of these valuable opportunities to learn and gather environment. During the keynote address, we have muted all the participants. However, please note that you can still utilize the chat option located at the bottom of your screen. If you have any queries or the question, please feel free to use the chat option. We will address your questions at the end of the session. Additionally, to accommodate any language barrier, since our keynote speakers, they are internationals, you have the option to switch on the caption features if needed. This will provide subtitle for the ongoing presentation. Thank you for your attention, and let us now proceed with the keynote session. As a session chair, now I kindly request Dr. Magar to take the charge of keynote addresses for the day. Dr. Magar, it is over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Abu Sufyan. Dear participants, we are starting the keynote address of the first session by Dr. Jason, Associate Professor of Educational Psychology, University of Australia. Before starting and handing the session to Dr. Jason, it's my responsibility to introduce today's keynote speaker to the participants. Dr. Jason is a Deputy Associate Dean, Academics and Associate Professor of Educational Psychology, the University of Australia, Brisbane. Sir has completed his PhD from James Cook University and Masters of Learning Science Technology from University of Sydney. Dr. Jason is an internationally recognized scholar and leader in the learning sciences, educational psychology, and educational technology. He has published over 100 refereed articles and is a national award-winning educator. Jason's research with the Learning, Instruction, and Technology Lab focuses on cognitive, metacognitive, and emotional mechanism of learning, which is very important, and also primarily in digital learning environment. He has a particular interest in self-graduated learning with artificial intelligence. Dr. Jason has currently served as a lead editor of Australian Journal of Educational Technology and editor of Student Success. Sir has got 7 honors and awards, and he is volunteering as a lead editor for many journals, as a forum member, Division of Psychological Research, Education and Training, Australia Psychological Society. Sir, I sincerely request you to take over the session on ChatGPT for lesson planning. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Doctor. Good morning, everybody. And I'd like to acknowledge the distinguished guests with us today and say hello to colleagues. Welcome. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully we can see that okay. Okay, thank you. Yes, good morning, everybody. So I will talk a little bit about the use of artificial intelligence, particularly generative artificial intelligence, specifically for lesson planning this morning. If you have any questions or any comments, please feel free to use the chat. The chat function you'll be able to access at the bottom, as you heard previously. And we will have a little bit of time at the end of this for a little bit of discussion if anybody would like to ask any questions. So you've heard a little bit about me. That was a very generous introduction. Thank you very much. What I will add to that introduction is that I am not a computer scientist, as you heard. I do work in the area of educational psychology. So what you're about to hear is really about how this technology can help us to think about what we're doing in our teaching. So the focus is not on a technical aspect of artificial intelligence. It is on how these tools and all of these emerging tools can be used to help us with planning lessons and providing an outstanding educational experience for our students. So no technical things, but it will be very much about the educational side of generative artificial intelligence. So there are three things that we will talk about here this morning. One is to talk about what is it that we are talking about, what is generative artificial intelligence. And again, that will not be a technical overview of the tools, but just to make sure that we're all of the same definition of what the tool is that we're talking about here. What can we do with these new technologies that have emerged? And again, particularly around what these tools mean in an educational context, and specifically, how can this help us with lesson planning? So that's what I'm going to talk about in some detail, those three particular areas. In case you weren't already aware, there are new generative artificial intelligence tools like ChatGPT and many others that are emerging since the end of last year, November last year. And there are a lot of implications for education for these new tools. There was initially some panic and some concern, including here in Australia and in other parts of the world, that led to a lot of jurisdictions banning these tools and the use of these tools by students. That is one approach to dealing with the emergence of these new technologies. We're going to start to talk today about what some of the benefits are. So I would just want to recognize here that there are some challenges with these new technologies, but we will focus on some of the important and interesting ways that we can use this to help in education. Here's an example from my context where there was an immediate ban. There is still a ban. Students are not allowed to use ChatGPT in the context of Queensland, where I am in Australia, and that is the case around most of Australia and still in many places around the world. So that has been a very strong response up until this point. However, let's talk a little bit more about what these tools actually are, and then we can think about what they can do to help us in our jobs in education. So generative artificial intelligence is the term that we are using, and it is a term that describes a certain type of technology. It fits into a pattern of what we would broadly term artificial intelligence. However, these tools are not like humans. They're not in any way capable of general intelligence, the same as a human is. So they're really more fittingly called a machine learning or, a deep learning, a set of algorithms and a database that have been developed for a very specific purpose. And that means that it does a very narrow range of things, which are mostly about the way that these tools produce text. So ChatGPT, for example, does a very good job of predicting what words come after other words, but it is not a general intelligence like a human is. So it's not a general artificial intelligence. It's a form of machine learning that we're dealing with here. And that has implications for what it can do in terms of how it works in an educational environment. It is a very narrow set of things that it is able to do. It's also worth mentioning here that although if you've had some exposure to ChatGPT, and if you haven't had a chance to look at it, I would certainly encourage you to do so. It is a very powerful tool. However, there have been similar tools around for nearly 70 years. So one example here was a program called ELIZA, which is still available online now. And it is a chatbot that works like a psychotherapist, like a psychologist. And this is something that we've been playing with, something that we've been working with since the 1990s. So while a lot of what we're experiencing right now might feel new and different, there has been a lot of work on understanding these kinds of tools for many decades now. That includes numerous journals that are invested in the use of artificial intelligence in education. There are two examples here. So the International Journal of Artificial Intelligence in Education has been published for many years already. So there is a lot of work and a lot of research already out there to give us some guidance about how best to incorporate ChatGPT and other generative artificial intelligence into education. And some of that I'm going to talk about here today. The other thing to keep in mind here is that the underlying model, or the underlying what we call a large language model, is a huge database that has an enormous amount of information in it. Much of that information has been drawn from the internet, and as is the case with this argument here, it is parroting back some of the things that we find on the internet. Not everything on the internet is accurate. Much of what is on the internet is not accurate, and therefore we've got to be very careful that whatever is produced using any of these tools is not simply parroting back some of the things that are incorrect that it has in its database. So there is a lot of problems here around the accuracy of the information that is produced by ChatGPT and Bard and other large language model chatbots. So we've got to be a little bit careful about what these tools are, what they do, and how accurate the information is that they produce. Importantly, these tools are not like a human. As I said before, they're not a general artificial intelligence. They're what we would call a very narrow artificial intelligence that is very good at producing text. There are other tools that are out there, such as Midjourney, that you might be familiar with, that can produce images. But again, it's a very narrow form of intelligence. And the other important component in this is that these tools are not like calculators. For example, a calculator will perform calculations. What ChatGPT and other generative artificial intelligence tools do is that they guess, they make predictions, and some of those guesses are not going to be correct. So very important for us to distinguish between a generative artificial intelligence and a human intelligence and the sorts of things, for example, that a computer can do. And this all starts to build a case as to what these tools can be used for in an educational environment and what they're not very good at doing in an educational environment. So that's a little bit of background. Many of you are probably familiar with that information, but I think it's useful for us to make sure that we are all talking about the same kinds of technologies here, just so we're clear at the beginning what it is that we're going to actually use them for. So the next question here is, what can these new technologies and tools do for us? What can they do to assist in education? There is a lot of talk out there. Here's an article, for example, from the Harvard Business School, where the argument here is that ChatGPT can work as a teaching assistant and can work very effectively for things like lesson planning. So there is certainly a lot of information out there about how we might use these tools to help us in education. And if you're not familiar with the work of the Khan Academy and Sal Khan, there is a lot of work going on with the Khan Academy about how they might use forms of generative artificial intelligence like ChatGPT, coupled with some of the approaches that they already use to develop personalized learning experiences for students. So there is certainly a lot of potential out there and a lot of discussion about the power of large language models and generative artificial intelligence for enhancing student learning. Let's talk about some of the specific applications before we get into the lesson planning component, because again, I think that there is a picture here that is developing about how we might use these tools more broadly in education, and then what this might mean for the lesson planning component specifically. So one example here, you can see that I've asked for a very high level lesson plan. I'm going to show you another example shortly, which is a much more detailed example. So this is an example from my context here, where I have simply prompted, this is ChatGPT, for a secondary school lesson plan in psychology. And with a very simple prompt, it hasn't done a bad job with providing a lesson plan here. It's not the best lesson plan I've ever seen, but even with a very simple prompt, we can get some good guidance about how we might go about doing a lesson. We can do a bit better than this, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go. We can also use these tools. Again, you might have already done some of this kind of testing with it to generate communication. So here's an example where I've asked it to provide me a letter, a supportive letter for some parents to help them to understand where their children are. So again, the way that we might communicate can be helped by using these tools. So there are some very basic functions there, administrative functions that we can start to use these tools for. Let's talk a little bit more about the learning and support side of things, and some work that we did before the introduction of ChatGPT. This is with a colleague of mine here in Australia on how we might use artificial intelligence to help with the student support component. And this was through a live chat option. So you might be familiar with these sorts of tools. They are often on retail websites, and they can provide question and answer help when people are lost on a site or need some assistance as they're working through. We implemented one of these in large online courses, and the point of the artificial intelligence was to provide answers to questions that students might have whenever they've become stuck. And it was very effective. You can see we wrote a particular article about this here that we've got published. It was a very effective way of using artificial intelligence to support students. This is what it looks like. So you can see it is like a private messaging service, but it provides an individual response to students. The way that this works, importantly, is that the artificial intelligence managed straightforward questions, simple questions, and then anything that was more complicated would get passed on to us where there would be a human intervention. So another way that we can use this technology to help us in education. We can also do other fairly mundane tasks. This is an example where I've asked ChatGPT to produce a glossary of some of the most important terms. I teach students about theories of learning. My students are going to be teachers in the future, and I've asked ChatGPT to produce a very simple glossary of some of the key theories of learning in education. Again, a very simple prompt, and it came back with some very useful material. I then asked it to be a little bit more precise and provide some more information and to group some of these theories together. Again, it did a very good job of this. So these are important parts of the lesson planning process, providing resources for students, and ChatGPT does a reasonable job of this. As I said before, I think it's really important to be mindful that it does not always produce completely accurate information. So it's worth making sure that it's provided correct information. In this case, it absolutely has. So we're able to produce resources for students that need some checking, but can be done very easily and very quickly. There is some research emerging around the world on the main reasons that teachers are using ChatGPT in particular, but increasingly the other large language model based generative artificial intelligence as well. And you can see that lesson planning is the top response here. We also see that teachers are using ChatGPT and other generative artificial intelligence to help with brainstorming ideas and to help build background knowledge and understanding before developing and delivering lessons of various different kinds. So this is very new research. It's only been out for a couple of months, and we're starting to see more and more ways that teachers are able to use these new technologies in various different ways. So a lot has happened in a short time frame, given that we've only had access to these tools since about the beginning of the year. And already we're seeing a lot of ways in which teachers are using these generative artificial intelligence to help with various parts of the teaching and administering their learning activities. This is also facilitated further by various add-ons and plugins and other types of technologies that have been built on top of the large language models like ChatGPT. I'll talk about a couple of examples here as well, because again, I think that these are important tools that can be very helpful for using artificial intelligence to enhance student learning. There are a few examples I'll talk about here. This is one tool. A lot of these tools require a subscription, but they let you have at least one go at using the tool without charging the subscription for them. So they might be worth having a look at if you're curious about these. So this is one tool called Knowledge. And what this will do is you can provide some text. So in this case, I've tested it with a book chapter. It's a book chapter about how students learn. And within a couple of minutes, this site will turn what is a chapter into a full online e-learning module. It includes a series of multiple choice questions, word matching exercises, crossword puzzles, and a whole range of different activities for students to do when they're going about their learning in this online environment. Usually these kinds of online modules, if you like, take quite a long time to develop and are quite expensive. So to be able to use a tool to be able to do this within minutes is quite an advance in what we're able to do with online tools. So one example there where we can use some of these tools that are built on top of ChatGPT and other large language models to do quite amazing things in a very short time frame. Another one here, which is a slightly different tool, is as useful in the research side as it is in the teaching side. This is a tool called i-CiTeL. And what this will do is it will do a systematic review of the available literature online, again, within about a minute. So you can put in a topic in there and it will pull out all of the widely available online material, scholarly material on that topic very rapidly. This is also something that we would find that would take a significant amount of time and be quite expensive to do otherwise. It also needs to be checked for accuracy, but when I've tested this with topics in my own area, I found it to be pretty close. So it's a very good estimation of what the systematic review needed to look like. A third tool that I'll touch on here, this goes back to something that is much more closely related to learning. This is a tool called Synthesia. And what this tool does is it will take some written material, some text, and it will turn it into a video where you can see here a human is represented. This is not a real person. This is a simulated person, and that person will deliver that text-based material in a video, and that video will be produced by this site. So again, quite an amazing development, not something that we had available to us even a year ago, and a very rapid way of being able to produce resources that help students with their learning. And these resources and tools, that, like the one you can see here, are only going to become more and more advanced in the months and years ahead. So some quite amazing ways of being able to develop resources for students very quickly. We can also use even the basic tools for a level of personalization. So I have 2 young children. They like certain books that have been written by certain authors. I can ask ChatGPT here in this example to produce some stories that are about my daughter in this case and are written in the style of the particular author that they like. So there is an enormous possibility here for personalizing various kinds of online learning objects for students using these tools. Again, you can imagine what this looks like when it's not just text-based material, but where we're able to produce video material or other online learning material for students that is personalized for them. Right? And there are, again, quite amazing opportunities opening up in that regard. And a lot of this builds on some of the things that we've seen in the past. And, you know, we will see more of this kind of thing embedded into the day-to-day products that we're using and applications that we use in our day-to-day work, as was the case back when Clippy, and some of you might have seen that about 20 years ago. So more and more, this is going to be embedded within everything that we do. Okay, so I just want to touch on the implications of this, and then we'll talk more directly about the lesson planning process and where some of these tools are going to be particularly useful in that part of the job. There is a lot of discussion around the world now about how these tools are going to help us as educators in our job to cut down some of the workload. And you can see some of the tools that I've shown you already provide enormous opportunities for making really engaging material for students that doesn't require enormous amounts of work. So there does seem to be some potential there. And there is also an element of this where we need to be thinking about what does it take to prepare students for a world where these kinds of artificial intelligence is available everywhere. So we also need to be mindful that part of the equation here is that we need to be preparing our students for a world where this technology is freely available to them. So there are a couple of different tensions there that we need to be mindful of as educators, that partly our job is going to potentially become simpler because we have these new tools to use, but we also need to be mindful that there are some things that are going to be a little more complicated because we're preparing students for a world that is different to the one that most of us have been educated for. None of these tools, you know, were available like this when most of us were at school and going through university. So it is a very different environment. Okay, let's get into the lesson planning part. So I want to talk specifically here about how we might use generative artificial intelligence to help to go through the lesson planning process. We've done a lot of work in this area to figure out what it's good at and what it's not so good at. And I'll take some time to give you a feel for what that looks like. So why are we talking about this? Why is lesson planning a really important thing for us to think about how we might use this new technology? Now, I'm going to talk about an example here in Australia, but I think it's probably true in schooling, in university, in higher education, in vocational education, and so on. Teaching is hard work. Teaching is complicated. We have a lot of humans in our classes who are all different, who we need to try and help to reach a certain outcome that we're looking for at the end. That difficulty in the Australian context and in many other parts of the world has meant that a lot of people who are teachers, again, in every kind of teaching that we can think of, are finding that job difficult, and many people are leaving to do other things. There has been an enormous emphasis on this in Australia, where the difficulty of the teaching as a profession has been something that the national government here has been very interested in, and there have been some investigations into how we might address some of these problems about the difficulties that we find of being a teacher. One of the big ones, of course, is workload. So we know, and no doubt for many of us here in this virtual room, there is quite a substantial workload associated with teaching, and often it means that we can't necessarily give all of our students all of the kinds of best experiences that we would hope that they would have. It's a very difficult job that we do as educators. But I think that's where we can start to think about tools such as ChatGPT as a way of being able to assist, provide ideas. And as you saw before, lesson planning is one of the key areas that people globally are starting to see some advantages in using these tools. So here's an example where I've asked ChatGPT to produce a lesson for me, and we actually went through the process of delivering this lesson. There are a couple of things that I'd like you to notice here. The first is that the prompt that I have put into ChatGPT, if you're not familiar with generative artificial intelligence. The prompt is the information that I've given the ChatGPT interface here. It's quite a long prompt, so I've had to tell it, for example, that it is providing me some guidance in its role as a large language model. I want a particular kind of lesson. I want it for a particular group of students. I've also told it the way that I want to teach and what I think is important as a teacher. I've also given it some context about where in the program of study the particular lesson sits. And I've also then obviously given it some idea about what the content is that we are trying to cover in the lesson. Where are we trying to get the students to at the end of it? So very important here, if we're going to use these tools for lesson planning, that it needs to have enough information to be able to produce something that is usable. Even with this amount of information, I needed to run the model several times to actually get something that I could use. So I needed to provide further information through more prompts in order for the lesson plan to be something that we could actually take and implement in the classroom. So I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind here, is that prompting ChatGPT is not straightforward. If you want something that is going to be usable in an actual classroom environment, it does require some ability to be able to provide it the right kind of information that it needs for us to get what we need out of it. And a lot of that comes through practice. So I've found that I've gotten better at being able to prompt ChatGPT as I've spent more time using it, but it took a little while to get there. So on the basis of that, I then, as I said, had to provide further information to help it to produce something that I could use. So one thing that I didn't tell it is how many students I had and what the space that I was in looked like. And that was really important information for it to be able to produce something that was usable. So I have quite a large group of students. I have 120 of them in a class all at once. We're in a very large collaborative flat floor room. It's not a lecture theatre. And that was important information for it to be able to generate a lesson plan that I could actually use. So the key point here is that, yes, ChatGPT can help with the lesson planning process, but it is not simple. It's not straightforward. It needs a lot of information to be able to produce a lesson plan that actually works and that will work effectively. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is as we work through this particular example. So I wanted to give you a sense of what it was to actually deliver this lesson. So my colleague and I have a demonstrator who I work with in my actual lessons in my teaching. And my demonstrator and I, we, as you've just seen, asked ChatGPT to produce a 1-hour lesson for us. And we delivered it. Once it was actually usable, we delivered it as ChatGPT asked us to deliver it. What it did a really good job with is it provided some very good guidance on the materials that we needed for the lesson. That was very useful and very helpful to get us set up for that first lesson. So you can see there's a list of materials there that we need: some PowerPoint slides, some case studies. We needed to embed some videos in the design that it gave us, and so on. So very good at doing that, and gave a lot of information that was very useful about the materials that we needed. It also went into some detail about each of the activities that it had built into the plan and gave some specific details. We want groups of 5 or 6 students. We want them to be looking at these case studies. We need to have some idea of what those case studies are, and so on. So again, it did a reasonable job of providing us information about that component of the lesson as well. But it was very difficult. So both the demonstrator and I, when we delivered this lesson, we found it difficult to deliver. And I think it's probably useful for us to talk about why that is the case. So it was a challenging lesson to deliver in the time that we had. What was interesting was that we asked the students at the end of the 1-hour lesson that we delivered. These are 120 students who are going to be future teachers. We asked them if they noticed whether anything was different or not, and they said that they did not. So ChatGPT was able to produce a lesson that worked for us in our class with our students, and they didn't see any difference in quality from the lessons that they had been used to from previous classes. However, for us, it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work because the lesson that ChatGPT produced didn't align directly with the way that we teach. And we needed to adapt that lesson to our particular teaching style. So while it's useful for coming up with new ideas, we needed to do some work to make it actually fit what we were trying to achieve in the class. It doesn't estimate all of those things very well. And let's talk about a little bit about why. So this is a framework that we use to understand the context of teaching and the context of pedagogy. Now, I'm going to focus on one part of this. The middle section is about the settings that we find ourselves in. This is work from Peter Goodyear, who is at the University of Sydney. We need to think about the environment of teaching, the sorts of activities and tasks that we have in our teaching, what are the sort of institutional environments or school environments that we're working in, what students are actually doing within those environments, and what sorts of outcomes they achieve. Those are really important components of everything that we do, but I am going to focus on the pedagogical framework here, and I think this is a really useful way of understanding how we can get the most out of ChatGPT and generative AI to help with lesson planning. So let's start at the top of this pedagogical framework and think about what a teaching or a learning philosophy looks like. ChatGPT can't give us this as teachers, but this is a really important component that helps us to get the most out of this new technology. And really, a lot of this is about what are our assumptions about how students learn, how do we see ourselves as teachers, and what are the sorts of ways that we try to think about what the learning process looks like for all of our students. That guides everything else that we do. Now, ChatGPT can't give us that. It can't provide us with a particular way of seeing learning and understanding our students. So that's a really important foundation in all of this. What are the things that we assume about learning? How can we draw on our understanding of learning to help facilitate the progress for our students in the most effective ways? This is important because I think this drives the way that we then understand that learning process over time. So there are two different ideas about how learning plays out. One is that it's the acquisition of ideas, the acquisition of knowledge. Then the other one is that it's about participating in thinking in different ways, and that is through collaboration and otherwise. Ultimately, we want to have a little bit of both of these things, and ChatGPT doesn't quite know how to balance these things out, it seems. So we have to provide information so that it knows which of these two is the more important approaches that we need to take. Sometimes we need students to know things, to understand things. At other times, we need them to actually do something meaningful with that knowledge. And it's not always clear from what comes out of ChatGPT that there is the balance is right there. So that's something that we need to be able to bring to this. We have a set of principles that we rely on to help inform all of this. These were developed as part of a large national project here in Australia. I've got a link there that you can have a look at these principles, but essentially we use these as the foundation for thinking about how learning works and how we can then take this understanding and translate it into what we actually do in our classroom environment. So that provides us our first foundation. Many of these things are fairly obvious, but it was important for us to find the evidence for this so that we knew we were doing the right thing. Learning should be deep and meaningful, it should be contextualized, it should be appropriately challenging, but not too challenging, it should be interactive, and so on. All right? So these are the foundations that we take that inform our pedagogical philosophy. From there, we should then be able to think about what is the overall approach that we will take in the way that we teach. Again, ChatGPT can't tell us this, and it's not very good at being able to do this. We need to be able to provide this information to it. So being clear on this, as well as being clear on the pedagogical philosophy or how we see learning working, are both really important components for getting the most out of generative artificial intelligence for assisting with our learning, our lesson planning. A big part of this is what is the overall way that we teach in our discipline? What is the tradition? Every discipline is different, and we all have our own effective ways of teaching and helping our students to learn most effectively. So because there is some variation there, we need to have some clarity about what are the sorts of traditions that we have in our discipline, because those traditions are there to help students to become good thinkers and good learners in that discipline area. So I've studied in psychology and education and management. They're all slightly different and they all have their own ways, and that's really important to be clear about. If you have heard some of these kinds of terminologies before, we talk about these as a signature pedagogy. So what is the kind of characteristic way that we teach and learn in particular discipline areas? ChatGPT can't make that decision for us. We as educators also need to be clear on what that means to us. We have a foundation that we also use to inform this, and that is built on these, what are called pillars of online pedagogy. These don't just apply to online. This is work that came out of the pandemic that suggests that these are the most important teaching approaches that seem to have the maximum benefit for students. So this provides us with an overarching way of thinking about what is the way that we like to teach. And it's about relationships and community. ChatGPT can't do that bit. We want to try and go for active learning. We want students to have some sort of choice and feel a level of agency in their learning. We want them to feel as though they can master what they need to be able to understand and to learn. And we want to be able to try and personalize it for them. Again, there are some components of this that ChatGPT is going to be very helpful with. For example, I've already talked about personalization of learning, but there are other parts such as relationships and community that really, as educators, we are still going to be critically important. You know, we're not going to be replaced by artificial intelligence when it comes to that part of the learning process. So that provides a bit of a foundation. It's really important to be clear on those things if we're going to get the maximum benefit out of generative artificial intelligence for lesson planning. So that's a philosophy. The high-level pedagogy is overall, how do we go about our teaching and learning in our particular areas? The strategies are the things that you do see mostly represented in a typical lesson plan. I might run a webinar, or I might develop a video, or I might have a group work activity. All of these are strategies, and ChatGPT is fantastic at being able to provide lots of different strategies that we might use in a teaching situation. So this is the part that it's particularly good at. And I think that that's because it's drawing on millions of lesson plans that are already out there on the internet. So it has a huge database of different strategies that we might use to help with student learning. And it really comes down to this idea of a sort of deliberate design. It can help us with this design process. We also need to be clear, though, in terms of what it means for us as educators. So yes, it will produce some really great ideas about different strategies or different approaches that we might take to teaching students, but we also need to be careful of ensuring that we're clear on how we see our role as educators. So as an example here, I'm in the first column at the top. If I'm a teacher here, my role here is a presenter. Often we want situations where we actually want to facilitate learning. We want to be able to guide student learning rather than present to students, or we want to be able to develop their ideas and help them go through a process where they change their conception of something. And understanding where we are here is also really going to help us to tell ChatGPT what kind of lesson we want to have. So it will do a great job of giving us lots of ideas. Being clear on who we see ourselves as a teacher will help it come up with better ideas that will suit what we're trying to achieve. And then that will feed into a particular kind of lesson planning approach. Another thing that it is very good at doing is providing a good sequence of activities. So if we've got an hour or 2 hours, if we provide the information to ChatGPT about how we want to sequence a set of activities, it will also do quite a good job of that. And that can be, for example, a sort of introduction phase, an exploration phase, a consolidation phase. Providing that information to ChatGPT will again get a sequence of activities that will work really effectively. The classic science approach, which is sort of a predict, observe, explain. Students make a prediction about something, we carry out a study, and then we sort of explain what happened. ChatGPT will also do a very good job of that if we provide the information to do that, to take that approach. It can also provide us other kinds of non-standard approaches to sequencing, such as the sort of productive failure, or what is sometimes called the learning pit, where we might want students to grapple or find something difficult or find something challenging and then work their way through it towards the end of a lesson. ChatGPT is great at doing all of these kinds of things if we give it the right set of information. So in terms of the actual planning, the sorts of things that appear in a lesson plan, generative artificial intelligence seems to be quite good at that. But we need to be clear at the beginning on how do we understand our students' learning and what is the overall approach that we want to take. That's important information for it to be able to produce a lesson that we can use. Finally, at the bottom here is tactics. And the easiest way to describe tactics here is that we come up with a strategy. I'm going to have a webinar. A tactic is, how do I make that webinar work? Right? What do I need to do in order for that webinar to be effective? How do I manage the chat? How do I make sure that I've got the right microphone? Right? So that's the difference between a strategy and a tactic. And really the question is, how do we get this to work? ChatGPT is not very good at that. So it can provide us a set of strategies, but ultimately, because relationships are really important as part of the learning process and teachers play an important role, ChatGPT can't do that. We need to do that as educators, and that's really critical for us. And that is why we found the process of teaching a ChatGPT lesson difficult, because it didn't fit with the way that we would usually support a lesson approach. We had to work hard to make that lesson work for us and for our students. So being clear on all of these things makes a huge difference. And another way to think about these kinds of tactics, if you like, is what some people refer to as teaching micro skills. Okay, if I'm running a workshop, what do I need to do as an educator to make that workshop work most effectively? Sometimes we refer to these sorts of things as behavior management strategies, particularly in primary and secondary education or elementary education, but we don't tend to talk about it as much in a higher education environment. It is nonetheless important. While we have a lesson plan, we also need, as teachers, to be able to execute that lesson plan effectively. And there are many different skills that come within that. These are not things that, again, ChatGPT can help much with, because these are really about teacher dispositions. The good news is, because these are so important to student learning, is that all of us here as educators are not going to be replaced by artificial intelligence. These are necessary and really important components that help to build the relationships that allow students to learn effectively. So the scorecard here is that we have found through our studies and through our experimenting with ChatGPT, it can't tell us about how learning works. It can't provide us with a pedagogical philosophy. It's not very good at establishing what our overall approach, our high-level pedagogy is. Those are things that we need to have clarity on to be able to get the most out of these tools. It can help us enormously with coming up with a range of different strategies to help students learn. But whatever strategies it comes up with, we as teachers need to be able to implement those strategies. And it also doesn't do a particularly good job of that. So very, very helpful with one part of teaching, less helpful with some of the other important parts. And as long as we're clear on where we are and as educators, how we see ourselves, how we go about doing what we do at a high level, it can be enormously helpful for that lesson planning process. So I have written about this. We use LinkedIn a lot here in Australia. I tend to post articles on there. It's very easy to find me there if you'd like to see any of the articles. I have talked about our experience of using ChatGPT as a lesson plan. If you can access LinkedIn, if you look me up, I'm Jason M. Lodge, and you'll find the stories that I've written about our lesson planning processes. I will also say at this stage that I haven't talked much about assessment design. That is a whole another area that is worth considering here. It's a very complex area because one of the great concerns about generative AI is obviously that students will use it to do their assessment for them or do their homework for them. And that's something we're still sorting out. We do have a range of options on the table that we've been thinking about. I won't go into this now, but it is, I think, an important part of the planning process that we need to consider. And we still have some work to do to figure out how to do that most effectively. So that's what we're currently trying to figure out here in Australia. And I know that there's a global effort on figuring out the best ways to assess students now that we've got these new tools in place. But that's our experiences with lesson planning and how we've been thinking about it, and what we're starting to see that it is really useful for. But I think one of the major things that I'd leave you with is that as teachers and as educators, we have a really critical role to play in how generative AI can be used to help student learning. And I don't see that we're going to get replaced anytime in the near future by these robots, because there is so much of learning that is about human relationships. So thank you for the opportunity for speaking today, and I hope the rest of the conference goes well. We've got a little bit of time for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jason, for excellent session on ChatGPT. Here is one question on chat box. What will be the strategies for behavioral management on ChatGPT?
That's a really good question. And I think for me, that part really comes down to being human. And those are the kinds of things that we have used as teachers forever. So making sure that we have respect with our students, that we provide them a way of being able to interact, that they feel like they belong in the classroom with us. All of these are really important components to ensuring that we don't call it behavior management as much in higher education, but it is really about having a respectful and positive classroom environment. And the research shows that I think that is one of the most important components that we can have to make sure that, you know, the classes work the way that we would hope that they work. And we have a big role to play in that as teachers. But, you know, these are things that we've known in education for a long time. It's really about, you know, how we do that well and, you know, have a positive classroom environment. Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Jason. Any others question, clarification, even from organizer? Yeah, please.
The question asked by Salma Madam: for every efficient delivery of the lesson, evaluation is the most important. Can ChatGPT help us for that also, especially for the lesson?
That's a really good question. My sense from some of the testing that we've done is that evaluation can be done, but it's very complicated. And this is some of the work that we're still trying to understand now, is how we might use the technology to be able to help us with the evaluation of students. It's partly complicated because if a machine can make a judgment on student work, then there is a question about whether or not that work is the most valuable thing for students to be doing, because it's probably more likely that the machine could do that work itself. So there's a very tricky and difficult question that we're still figuring out there. It looks possible, but it's difficult.
Can I ask a question, Dr. Magar, if you permit?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so a very insightful talk, Jason. I mean, this is the buzz that is going on for another year or so, that, you know, people are into ChatGPT. One philosophical and a high-level question that I have, and, you know, since you've been working a lot with these generative models, is especially for students, you know, how do we, I mean, to me, when they're into these formative years where they're developing their skills, their language, you know, how do you, banning them is not a solution, because they're going to circumvent anyways out of it. How do we scaffold that, or how do we guide them so that we ensure that they leverage the power of technology At the same time, we don't want them to be not developing those skills that they should be developing for the future that's coming in front of them, rather than just copy pasting it from ChatGPT or Bing. But what's your thoughts as an educator in terms of guiding students on that?
That's a really good question. And I think it's a really complex question. The way that we're approaching it here in Australia is that we are trying to empower teachers to be able to make the best decision about what is most appropriate for their students in terms of the learning that they need at various points in the process of learning. And I think it's important for it to be at that level rather than it to be a very heavy-handed policy approach like banning it,
Right.
because I think we need to understand the trajectories that students are on, but there are also a number of complicating factors that are related to the foundational knowledge that is required in certain areas. You need to actually, so I think medical students, for example, they need to actually understand the parts of the body before they can start to think of the things that go wrong with those different parts. So we absolutely need to have some level of foundational knowledge there, and how we assess that, how we evaluate that level of knowledge, how we help students to do that. I think there's enormous opportunities for generative AI to assist with that. But, I think your question is a good one, and I think it's going to take us a little while to figure out how to do that most effectively. But I think teachers, again, have a really important role to play there. So the more work that we can do to help teachers to understand what these tools are and how they work and how they can help students, I think the better place we're going to be. I don't think a policy is going to fix that problem.
That is correct. I was at a conference recently at IIT Bombay, and Coursera was the major player there, and they have very intelligently built in which is called as a coach there within their platform, and it becomes like a 24/7 coach to students who are taking these classes. So that is something exciting that's coming up. It's a 24/7 assistant for students, and it does it in a very customized manner. Something that Sal Khan is also doing at Khan Academy with Khan and Migo, something like that. So I think that's inspiring, and that's kind of very welcoming. I think that's definitely going to assist students a lot in terms of personalizing the content and the knowledge that we give to them, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, over to you, Marius.
So इनको मतलब couple of questions लेके आप conclude करो.
Yeah. Yes, Dr. Sharik?
Yes, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
done
yeah,
with the question. Please
yeah,
go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. We'll have a couple of questions. Just there is one question, couple of questions on chat box. Do you need to have premier version of ChatGPT? How our teachers are affected by ChatGPT? Dr. Jason, can you highlight on this?
Sure, absolutely. Do you need to have the premium version? The short answer is no, it is better. And I've got access to both because this is part of my job. You can access the premium version of GPT, the underlying language model, through Microsoft Bing. So if you use the creative mode in Microsoft Bing, you can get access to the premium version without having to pay for it. It works in a slightly different way. It is better, the premium version. So it's worth having a look at that. Are teachers being affected by ChatGPT? I've seen a range of responses. There are still a lot of people who are not really very aware of what's going on, right the way through to there are people who are very heavily invested in the use of these tools and are already embedding them in a lot of the things that they do in their teaching. So teachers there is an entire range here of responses from no engagement whatsoever, all the way through to very heavily engaged in the use of generative artificial intelligence. So wide range of responses there. ChatGPT does not provide charts, images, diagrams yet. So there is a multimedia version that is coming, that is already available to some people. So there will be those sorts of alternatives very shortly. There are also plugins, what they call plugins, that you can add to ChatGPT that do start to do some of that work around images and diagrams, etc. So there are some tools already and more on the way. Just looking at some of the other questions.
Okay. So we'll take this last question, Dr. Jason. Is ChatGPT authentic in research work?
That's a really good question too. In terms of the various different things it can do in research, I think care is needed because of what I talked about before with some of the inaccuracies that can come out of ChatGPT. I think it would need to be used very carefully in research work, any kind of research work. We can't be confident of the accuracy of the information, and therefore you would need to be very, very careful.
Thank you. Thank you. Dear participants, of course, your questions will be taken. We'll communicate with Dr. Jason and we'll communicate with Mel, and he will answer those questions. Because of this paucity of the time, we'll end this session here. Dr. Jason, we sincerely convey our thanks for accepting our invitation to be a keynote speaker, and you have conducted this session fantastically on the right time, completed on the right time. Thank you very much from the Anjuman Islam's Kalsekar Technical Campus. Professor Abu Sufyan, over to you.
Thank you, Jason, for your insightful session. I think in interest of time, Dr. Magar, let's go ahead with the Dr. Ida session. You can start with his her introduction.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Abu Sufyan. I welcome for second session keynote address, that is redefining the role of educators to create responsible learners. Dr. Ida, keynote speaker here. This is my again privilege to introduce today's keynote speaker, Dr. Ida, who is a senior lecturer and convener for General Studies, Malaysia, Immersion and Pathways, Monash University, Malaysia. She teaches and leads the General Studies units at the Malaysia Immersion. She has crafted a diverse range of pedagogical approaches, incorporate active learning strategies, and leveraging digital platforms to enhance the interactive learning resources. She has made notable contribution to the academic community through the presentation and publication of research papers centering on effective learning and teaching practices, with a particular focus on a project-based learning and reflective teaching practices. In recognition of her remarkable achievements in transforming learning and assessment practices, she and her team have been honored with the Monash Pro Vice Chancellor Excellence Education Award. She has demonstrated unwavering passion and a deep commitment to her role as an educator. Currently, she is actively engaged in educational research projects, learning age multidisciplinary research initiatives that investigate the intersection of religion, culture, and medicine. Her research has successfully reached diverse audience, extending from local to international conferences. I heartily welcome Dr. Ida for the keynote speaker, and I sincerely request to take the session. Dr. Ida, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Rajendran, for your kind introduction. Allow me to share my screen.
Yeah, please.
Okay, thank you again for the introduction and the organizer for this invitation. And good morning, everyone. Actually, it's afternoon in Malaysia now. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to present on the topic of redefining the role of educators to create responsible learners. When I actually first got the invitation—
Dr. Ida, sorry to interrupt. Will you please make it full screen? Yes. Okay. Please go ahead now. Thank you.
All right. When I first got the invitation and I look at the theme of the conference, which is innovative teaching and exuberant learning. So I could imagine that many of the participants here are innovative in their teaching, but I'm more interested in the word of exuberant learning because that is something that I can relate to, especially from the previous teaching experience. So the question that comes to my mind is, do our students find learning is fun in our class, are more responsible towards their learning? does the fun pack or exuberant learning actually contribute to a student to be more responsible? That is the always question, important question that I ask myself. So I believe that most of us, we have our own stories in terms of our teaching, but today we will see what are the role that we could play to develop or to create responsible learners. So today we will explore the critical need to adapt our approach as educators to foster responsible and self-directed learners, because in today's rapidly changing world, the traditional role of educators as mere knowledge disseminator and authority figure is no longer sufficient. Because as Dr. Jason mentioned just now, the advantage of ChatGPT, we can find a lot of information, even resources for learning and teaching on ChatGPT. So what are the role of the educators? How we can actually become more effective in our teaching with all the digital technology that we have nowadays. So my opinion is our students require more than just information delivery. They need to develop essential skills such as critical thinking, problem solving, effective communication, adaptability, and ethical decision making. The word ethical decision making is very important because when we deal with the, again, AI technology, internet resources, is also involved the ethical decision making. So if not all, some of these essential skills could be developed through responsible learning. And in this presentation, I will focus on the role of educators. So in this presentation, our first focus will be the role of educators. Secondly, I will focus or narrow down the discussion to unfold the dynamic of project-based assessment in integrating element of responsible learning. And I will also share experience and discussion on the strategies employed and challenges faced in fostering responsible learning within the project-based assessment framework. Okay, I recently looked at this research. This is quite old research, but still relevant, right? From Stanford Research Center and Harvard University, I'm sure that many of you referred to this research previously. 85 found that 85% of job success come from excellent soft and people skill. 15% come from the hard and technical skill. And bear in mind, this research was conducted among engineering students. So the course that need hard and technical skill. So they found that 85% of the job success actually come from excellent and soft and people skill. So the question is, do we as educators prepare our students with the 80% of the skill? Because as educators, we normally focus on the syllabus, content, delivery, but do we focus on the 80% of the skill that required for them to success in their career? So let's begin our exploration of redefining the role of educators to create responsible learners. Before we go further, I have a question that I ask myself, and I'm sure many of you here asking yourself as well. Who are responsible learners? How we actually define responsible learners? So I have a QR code here. If you can help me to scan the QR code, because I want to see what are the characteristics of responsible learners, because this is very contextual. It could be different in social science, and this is something dynamic. So I just want to see what are the characteristics of responsible learners from the audience point of view before I go further unfold my narrative. So I maybe pause for half a minute to see what are the responses from audience. Okay, I can see some of the responses, very interesting. Take charge of learning, self-motivated, curious, good listener, wow. Follow up to class, okay. Constitute learning. Concentration, curious, all right. Keen of learning. Work hard and smart. Concentration. I see the word concentration like a few times. Good listeners. Okay, I maybe stop here. I'm sure you have more ideas, but I just stop here because I will unfold my narrative. And I see one word important there has a learning goal, which I also will discuss on the learning goal of the student, because as educators, we have learning outcome that we want to achieve. But what are the learning goals of the student? So I will back to the PowerPoint presentation. Thank you so much for your participation. Okay, I'm sharing here the photo of my student presentation. From my point of view, this is the manifestation of responsible learners from the previous experience. This photo that I'm sharing here is my student actual project presentation on Malaysian Multicultural Society. So I actually choose this photo because it shows manifestation of responsible learners from my context. Maybe to provide a bit of background for this project-based assessment. In this project, the majority of my students in this class came from science background, engineering, medicine, pharmacy, and so on. And only small numbers of them were arts and social science major. So they were required to choose one of the Malaysian culture tradition to present their topic in the demonstrative and interactive way. So this group actually chose a traditional 5 Chinese drum. When they proposed to me that they choose 5 Chinese drum as a topic, I could imagine that the student will go to watch the Chinese drum, bring one of the Chinese drum to the class and explain about this culture in Malaysian society. But I was very surprised that how students actually took full responsibility to learn new skill, to actually learn Chinese drum and presented it in the class with their research finding. So they actually demonstrated very responsible learning, which they explored the topic, planned the project throughout the semester, because I did the briefing in week 1 and the presentation was in week 10. So in 9 to 10 weeks, they actually went to the organization to learn about the Chinese drum and to learn a new skill. So in this project-based assessment, I played the role of facilitator between knowledge and student. I was no longer a content and knowledge provider, as students have to be responsible in organizing information and managing learning resources and within the formal and also informal setting, such as searching for information online and offline resources and approach community when they want to learn something new. So technically, students only met me for guidance when they need advice for this group, like 2-3 times in a semester outside the classroom, but they ask questions inside the classroom. So for me, this is the definition of responsible learning, where the learning responsibility is delegated to the student and the lecturer will play a role as a facilitator. All right. Just to share a bit of experience, I actually started implementing project-based assessment since 2007. And throughout the journey, as my role as educator, I understand that in the beginning, I actually play a role as a traditional lecturer who control the learning process. But throughout the journey, I understand that if we want our students to be more responsible, we have to delegate the responsibility to students to learn. So in short, that responsible learners have to dedicate their time, energy, and focus to develop understanding and also construct knowledge and skill. They have to define the purpose of their learning and determine how they will achieve their purpose. I noticed that there was one participant responded in the question just now, goal of learning, purpose of learning. So student, even though we have the learning outcome for the unit, student also must have their own purpose and learning objective that they want to achieve. So they have to learn overcoming the challenges that exist in the learning process. So why project-based assessment? Basically, project-based assessment serve as effective pedagogical method for enhancing educational experience. In project-based learning and also assessment, students act as an active actor by engaging in cycle of learning, including synthesis, analysis. They have to take action, and they also involve in the reflection process. So it is a dynamic tool that could serve learning in two purposes. The first one, it provides space for active learning, which involve active participation of students. And second one, project-based assessment is an assessment tool to evaluate student performance, not only the cognitive part of learning, but also social skill, because it also provides students with the opportunity to reflect on their practice throughout the journey of the project-based assessment. What are the characteristics of project-based assessment that help us as educators to develop responsible learner? So first and foremost, I think it's important for educators to integrate real-world relevance topic to merge between the learning theory, and the application in the real life, especially that cater context of the society. Normally, our syllabus is the same syllabus that we use over the years, but project-based assessment allow us to integrate new trends, issues, problems related to the theoretical aspect. So for example, we can get students to look at new issues in the society, problem, and even output that involve multiple stakeholders, such as industry and also communities. Bear in mind, we normally have to work around our learning outcome, desired graduate attribute of the university that we want to achieve, but at the same time, we have to make it relevant to the student. So when students find the theory or the content is relevant, they start to be responsible in their learning. So they cannot only depend on the textbook and educators, but they have to take charge of the learning. Okay, second point, which I think quite important, is a critical thinking and problem solving. Project-based assessment allow us to integrate critical thinking and problem solving. Learning activities should involve higher order thinking and require active participation among students. If the student just sit and listen to the lecture, they don't take the responsibility of learning. So they need more than that to act as a responsible learner. So the activities should require students to create their knowledge, linking new idea and their own experience to generate new or enhanced understanding. This aligns with the constructivist learning theory in developing knowledge in learning process. The project-based learning also lend itself to multiple knowledge acquisition theories. For example, it involves empirism, as students acquire knowledge through observation, not only by listening lecture in class, and through their experience about the chosen topic. So they have an enhanced knowledge about the topic. So constructing knowledge could happen anywhere, not only in the classroom, probably in cafe during discussion with teammates, where students normally feel more free to express their opinion, or interviewing people in the communities or industry, or even solving team members' conflict in group. because remember from the research found that 85% students who success in their career due to their soft skill. So solving conflict in a group is also a soft skill that students need to acquire in their learning process. So as we delegate the responsibility to students, we will have, they will have to in charge their own learning, and ultimately we shape them to become responsible learner. But again, this is based on the context of the discipline. In my discipline, it's possible, but in other discipline, maybe something that we want to explore. All right, this is another actual photo of project-based assessment that was presented in my class. The topic is about dyeing culture in Malaysia, and this group choose traditional puppet show, one of the culture in Malaysia. And in this project, students have to use multiple knowledge, hard and social skill in presenting their finding about this culture. So it's not only about the content of the presentation, but it's also involves social skill in communicating and planning the presentation, and involve the technical skill of setting up the puppet show. I remember this group was presented by engineering student. So even though this is not engineering subject, it's a social science subject, which is compulsory for them to complete to graduate. But the project-based assessment here give them different learning experience while learning about Malaysian culture and society. I guess this is a most important thing in creating responsible learners. Being responsible, definitely students need to collaborate and communicate. And even when they go to the industry, this is one of the most important traits that we should have is effective collaboration and communication. So one of the prominent facts and repeated feedback, I actually conducted research on this, where I find that collaboration and communication is one of the most prominent feedback given by students, which relate them to taking charge of their own learning, which I didn't realize in the beginning of the implementation of the project-based learning. For example, I quote here feedback from my students saying that strengthen friendship. I never thought that actually friendship or communication in the group actually very important to spark their motivation to learn. And for example, that this student said, I was certain that this unit that we had is most amount of fun. So this is how I relate to the exhibited learning. When students find fun in learning, they're actually willing to put more effort to spend time to learn and navigate the topic. So students also include to think creatively, which one of the advantage of responsible learning, because when students take charge of their learning, they try to solve the problem, they try to be creative. So this is one of the element, the advantage of the responsible learning. Okay, the next point that I would like to share here is a reflection and self-assessment. In a normal assessment practice, students normally receive the feedback at the end of the assessment. But in project-based assessment, students have to be responsible to reflect on their progress throughout the semester. So this is a very important role of educator that we have to provide students to reflect and assess their work throughout the journey. This reduces student dependency on the educator. And I think we as an educator play an important role to provide continuous feedback as well. So the feedback will come from two angles, from the instructor or from the educator, and also from the student. Because when they work in group, they can actually provide feedback to each other. Then this actually stimulate them to become more responsible in take charge of their learning. So continuous feedback is crucial as it support continuous and sustained learning. Because as I mentioned earlier, it's a common in academic setting, many assessments take place only after student completed the learning subject, such as assessment that is conducted at the end of the semester, final assessment, and so on. And students will receive feedback only after the assessment are over, and nothing they can do about the assessment. They cannot improve in between of the assessment. So research has shown that when educators provide immediate feedback, even in the beginning of learning, for example, in the beginning of the project, they are more effective as an education tool. So I feel that timely feedback can easily be practiced in project-based assessment, as the educator has the opportunity to provide timely and continuous feedback at different stages of the learning. And it is also important to create a learning support system for students to be able to maintain their learning pace and cope with challenges while completing the group project. For example, in my case, that I would provide feedback based on the project proposal, which is happened in the beginning of the semester, and students will have time to actually improve their planning and so on. So after I provide feedback, I actually delegate the responsibility of learning to the student. They have to take charge and implement their project without my interference. So indirectly, I already mentioned about the role of educators. Now the question is, again, what are the role of educators, which one of the essence that we want to achieve in this presentation. If you can see my PowerPoint here, there are two important words here, is effective and effective. Effective learning, I feel that it's quite easier to create effective learning, but effective learning is something that very difficult to achieve, but it's possible. That's how it's related to the context of the conference today, exuberant learning. So my thought is we must recognize that traditional approach to education are no longer sufficient. We are not only content provider to the student. The days of solely being knowledge disseminator and authority figure are no longer effective. We must redefine our role as educators and embrace new strategies and methodologies that promote responsible learning. So by redefining our role, we shift from being instructor who control learning process to becoming facilitators of learning. We encourage our students to become active participants in learning, even to question, to explore and seek knowledge beyond the confined classroom. For that, I think it's very important to provide safe space for students actually to question what are the things or knowledge that we learn in the class. Okay, one of the, I think there are many roles. I'm sure that you also aware we have many roles to play here. So I just pick like few important roles that I think is important. The first role that very important and very relevant in today's education is aligning learning motivation with the interests of students and the syllabus. I found that one of the most important criteria of an educator is the ability to align learning motivation with the syllabus and the interests of students. Because as an educator, we are tied with our syllabus and learning outcome. So how we actually link it or align it with the interests of students? What if students do not have interest in our subject? To be honest, this is what I encounter as educator who teach general studies, which is compulsory subject in higher learning institution in Malaysia. But it's not related to some of the degree, for example, student in science and student in medicine, pharmacy, because they are major in science, but they still have to do social science subject. So, and in this case, I have to find what are the elements that affects to the motivation in learning my subject. So the important point that I learned, which I did not find much in literature, is the educator's motivation actually, and our passion about the topic, the first thing that student could sense while we deliver the topic. Therefore, it is important we as educators first have a passion about the topic before we give autonomy to students to navigate the topic. And I think it's a human nature that people will perform best when they have interest and motivation. This includes intrinsic and also extrinsic motivation to learn. And I give one example here, which I feel very interesting discovery in my teaching. When I'm able to link the student interest with the subject, then students will start to find motivation and take charge of their learning. For example, my medical student may not find the subject about Malaysian ethics and culture relevant to them, but I can align the topic of Malaysian culture and ethnic to medical health topic. For example, traditional belief and practices in health and communities. So this apply to other fields as well, for example, engineering and so on. So students could see the relevancy of the topic to their knowledge and their study, which they have to think critically and creatively, and some of the solution maybe not exist in the textbook. So students have to take charge of learning, go out there, explore the topic, and come up with the solution. So I'm very sure that our students nowadays are in digital technology and era. They have access to all information, including online resources, as Dr. Jason mentioned just now about AI tools, which is very powerful in getting resources and information. So if we as educators only spoon-feed students with only information, they might lose interest to learn. So it is important for us to redefining our traditional approach and embrace a new approach in our teaching. So we can no longer bear the sole bearer of knowledge. We must be facilitator for learning. So by encouraging our students to actively participate in their education, question assumptions, seek knowledge beyond the classroom, we create environment that foster critical thinking and responsible learners. Because the needs of our students are evolving, as it is our responsibility to adapt in the age of readily accessible information, we must guide our students to in effectively navigating and evaluating sources, including being ethical when they find the information, when they navigate the topic and learn about the topic. And this is a very information that very important that cannot be replaced by the technology. We must address the social and emotional need of our students. They can find information online, but they have social and emotional support that need to be fulfilled. So as an educator, I think it's very important to promote empathy and also promote the responsible learning as a part of the learning process in our class. I know this sounds like educator as a superhuman. We have to kind of do everything, to juggle everything and to manage everything. But I think in our context, normally educator, we will try our best to ensure that students are going through the effective and effective learning environment. Okay, I find that utilizing the literature, self-reflection, and peer review actually improve practice if we want to instill responsible learning in our practice. I find reading educational journal or even listening to the conference like today give us idea how to improve practice and promote responsible learning among our students. In fact, it opened up creativity to develop an innovative approach in teaching by just listening to other educators who share their experience. And secondly, asking for review from supervisor and colleague is also important when we create any strategies to improve learning, particularly to create responsible learners in our class. I also find that peer review always helping me in refining learning and teaching strategies. But definitely I understand that we need an honest reviewer who could actually provide constructive feedback about our practices. And this could be done in a formal and informal setting. Okay, self-reflection. I find writing educators' reflection is important for several reasons. First, it encourages us to critically evaluate our teaching practices, because sometimes when we implement strategies, we tend to forget our experience after one semester. So if we write our experience and the things that we need to improve, evaluate our teaching practices, actually allowing us to identify strength and area for improvement in non-threatening environment. Because self-reflection is only us. So only we know which area of teaching that we need to improve. And reflection also promote professional growth and the development of effective instructional strategies. Additionally, it also helps us to connect between the learning theory and our practices. So the advantage about self-reflection, we could turn our reflective journal of teaching to a publication, because sometimes when we keep reflecting our practices, we can find the link in the literature, then we can actually write a paper to reflect our practices. Okay, last but not least, for improvement, I actually see at the student feedback. I know we receive different type of student feedback, but sometimes we can streamline what are the student feedback that is important for us to improve our practice. Okay, now we go at the topic of technology. I think that Dr. Jason already mentioned a lot about technology, so I will just go a little bit about the technology, how technology actually can help us to create a responsible learning environment. Okay, responsible learners are connected across time and situation, such as in school or outside school, formal and informal setting, and physical and online setting. The consistency of learning experience across diverse situations may involve multiple people and platform of learning. The goal is to enable learners to study the knowledge that they are interested in, and technology definitely play a crucial role in facilitating the transition between diverse places and platform. For example, what I show here is one of section in learning management system, my learning management system. I find that technology actually help us to delegate responsible to students to learn. For example, when students need to form group for their assessment, it's no longer us to take charge. So we can use the technology actually for students to form group, manage the group, having discussion online without the interference of the lecturer. Another very good features in learning management system, or even in other system that we can use, it provides space for interaction between students. So it's not only educators and students, but it's also student and student. So for example, here, if you see here, the first section, I have audio tool and quiz, because I teach a huge numbers of students. So we have the experiential learning that students will go to the site, to the religious places, which have a different impact of Asian civilization. So to bring 200, 300 students to a field trip is quite difficult and challenging. With the technology, I can provide audio tour to the student with all the instruction and the explanation for each site, and students have to take responsibility to go to the field trip and complete the quiz during the field trip. So this is how the technology actually can help us to navigate the responsibility to the student to learn. And when they come back, they can provide the evidence and reflection about what they learned during the trip. Okay, creating responsible learners is not that easy. we have so many challenges, but I'm just going to share challenges about creating, developing responsible learners in the context of project-based assessment. First and foremost, I think most of us are aware that it's a time management. It's very time consuming when we want to create a project, and monitoring the project is also very time consuming. So literature actually suggested scaffolded approach as an instructional strategy that provides students with structured support and guidance as they learn new concept or tackle complex tasks. The term scaffolding refers to temporary support structure that are gradually removed as students gain knowledge and skill, ultimately becoming independent learners. Meaning, for example, in the beginning of the learning process, we will guide students quite closely. One student being responsible and independent, we start to delegate more responsible to the student. The scaffolded approach is often used to help students bridge the gap between their current level of understanding and the desired learning outcome. It involves breaking down learning tasks into smaller, for example, like a project, breaking tasks into smaller, more manageable steps, and providing necessary resources and also feedback to assist students in reaching their goal. So there are numbers of steps when we want to implement scaffolded approach. The first one, we have to pre-assess. The teacher have to evaluate student prior knowledge and identify the learning need to design appropriate strategy. So we need to know the level of our student first. Secondly, the initial instruction, the teacher introduce the topic and providing clear explanation, demonstration if it involves technical skill, and example to establish the foundation of learning. So the instruction all must be clear, and with the help of the technology, even we give the instruction once to the student, we can always keep all the resources online. So student can always refer to the resources. And scaffolding technique also provide support. For example, the teacher provides support structure as resources. For example, let's say if we have the learning resources in university that students are not aware of, that is one of the role of the instructor or educator to provide the resources to the student. And at the end, we will leave our student with independent practice, and they will take charge of their learning. Okay, second one, we always have conflict here, aligning educators and learners' expectation. Educators, we have our own expectation, and learners, they have their own expectation. How we actually bridge the gap between expectation of educators and learners. I think this is very important guideline that we should give to the student, that learning, especially at the tertiary level, is no longer in charge by the lecturer. So students must know that they have to take charge learning, or else they cannot achieve the outcome that they want to achieve. So this is very important, and to provide more transparency, normally we always put our expectation or our guideline in written and make it available to the student. All right, challenge number 3, sustaining learning motivation. Student could be responsible, motivated in the beginning of the semester, but to sustain the learning motivation and their responsibility until at the end of the semester is one of the challenges that most of the educators face in their teaching practices. So it is important to always to give ongoing support and feedback, even online or offline, including a simple message to the student, for example, sending email to the student to catch up about how they progress in their learning. So always acknowledge the student performance, even not at the end of the project, not at the end of the learning, acknowledge their performance and provide constructive feedback. So students will feel that the learning process is ongoing and they always have to go on until they achieve what they want to achieve in the project. Right, last but not least, the challenges. I'm sure many of us face this, group dynamic. When students work in big group normally, they will face some conflict between team members and so on. And many of the time they actually refer to the lecturer on resolving the conflict in the group. But I think the best approach is to give students responsibility to resolve the conflict. Until if they cannot resolve the conflict, then only they come to the instructor or educator for advice. But the process of learning, for example, managing group, delegation of works, being responsible, all should be done by the student. Okay, I will conclude my presentation today with the statement that project-based assessment is a promising assessment tool to develop responsible learners. However, we as educators need to constantly review our practice. For example, the practice that I implemented 10 years ago could not be relevant in today's life. So we always have to constantly review the practice, understand cultural consideration. This is very important. Get constructive feedback from different stakeholders, including students as the main stakeholder in learning, if we want to improve the practice. Learning by doing indeed increase responsibility and responsive learning among students and lead to positive learning experience and engagement. And last but not least, it is important as educator, we continue unlearn the bad practices and relearn to continue our learning and teaching practices being relevant and also effective and effective. I think I will stop at this point. I appreciate your attention during this quite long presentation. I would like to thank organizer again for this opportunity to present in this conference. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Ida. It was not long presentation. It was perfect presentation on time, and it was very informative session, madam. Yeah. Any questions from participants? Any clarification questions?
Just one question I have.
Yeah, please. Please, Abhishek.
Okay. So it was very insightful session, Dr. Ida. I have one question. Generally, you spoke about the students' involvement in the classroom. But what do you think about community engagement and how it can play a role in fostering responsible learning?
I think this is a very important question and relevant because I noticed this when I ask students to go to the community, their motivation and their involvement and also their responsibility actually increase. It's not only active participation in class. When they go to the community, they start to take charge of learning and they learn soft skills. For example, when they go meet the industry to ask questions about certain thing, they actually ask me, should I ask this way? Can we approach organization and saying this way? These are all the skill is not in the textbook. So when they go to community, actually enrich their learning experience and create them to be more responsible.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Magan, I had a
please, Dr.
Yeah, so and very exciting and a very fantastic talk, Dr. Ida. I really appreciate your time sharing your valuable experience over the years in implementation. One challenge when we talk about project-based learning is designing of projects to students. The challenge is you don't want them to be very easy, that it provides a very black and white kind of an answer. It doesn't have to be extremely challenging. How do you what are the best practices in finding that sweet spot where it's kind of pleasantly challenging, as a word that you can use that? Any thoughts on that?
I think that is very important question, Dr. Sharik. I actually, in my presentation, my earlier presentation, I have that slide to show how project-based learning strategies can improve student responsibility by designing the effective project-based learning. But I just noticed that in one of the presentation, one of the key presenter will also present about project-based learning. So I removed that slide. So I don't want overlap with other presenter, but this is a good question. So I just share a bit tips about the project-based learning. The first one, I noticed that when we assign project-based learning, it should be something relevant to the student. Something present, relevant, and student can actually experience it. And it should be authentic. The problem that exists that they have to solve, the reality or the case study that actually exists in the community. And we should also provide sphere for students in project-based learning to collaborate. If they just divide the tasks between the members and everybody like doing their own thing and then merge together all their work, that doesn't involve a lot of collaboration. So the nature of the project needs students to interact, collaborate, and even if they want to argue in the group, I say just argue because this is the process of learning. So it should integrate the social skill. And I also noticed that when we allow project-based learning to be showcased for the public, for example, presentation or display their work online or offline, or even in the class presentation, that actually increase their motivation to implement the project-based learning. So we always have to link to their motivation.
That was very insightful. I think you presented a lot of things that kind of could be a structure for a good project. And one of the things that really liked was the problem should be authentic, and that you can really connect to students. I mean, a couple of months back when we were at MIT, they have this project called Teroscope where they give it to first-year students at MIT. And there are two things that you really talked about. One of them was the projects are authentic. And second, they have this MIT Teroscope Day where they display these projects to the entire MIT community and the social community around the Boston area. That gives that kind of motivation to students also when they present that kind of work that talks about their impact. So, very well said. Thank you so much for really valuable insights.
If I can share a bit of my experience that what relate to what you said just now to showcase their work. When I first construct this project-based assessment for the cultural topics, I asked students to present in class in front of their classmates. So the next semester, I actually opened the classroom to the public, public in the university, to other students as well. I could see the performance is totally different. So when I said at the end of the semester, we open the class for other students to enter and join the class, I can see the dynamic of the project-based learning totally transformed. That's what you said.
Absolutely. I think that motivates students, that gives them the responsibility, that gives them the ownership of the project as well, I guess.
Exactly.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Yeah. There is one question in the chat box. Dr. Ida, how much is the impact of peer pressure in students' performance?
Okay. I remember when I briefed about the project-based learning, I took the sample of the best project implemented last semester. So I would say that this is what was done in last semester, but for this semester, I expect something better. So there is a bit of pressure there, because I said last semester they just start this project. So now we have the sample of the project. So this semester we expect something better, but I always tell students, this project is not about competition. It's not that we compete among each other. The project is you compete with yourself to improve your knowledge and skill. So the peer pressure is there, but the narrative is not a competition and pressure, but how we can improve knowledge and skill. So if you are lacking in one topic and you want to learn in that topic, you don't compare with others, but work on how to improve your knowledge and skill in that topic. So yeah.
That's great. Okay, any other questions from participants?
One question I asked by Dr. Mujib, it is in a chat box.
Yeah.
He want to ask about how to balance
traditional
and project-based learning by the teachers in developing critical thinking within the digital era.
Oh, hard question.
Yes.
Traditional project-based learning by the teachers in developing critical thinking within the digital era. Okay, the nature of project-based learning, it should be authentic. If student can find information in digital space, that is not challenging anymore. So that's why we always have to revive. I use the word reflect. We always have to use the word reflect because we want to see what are the relevant now, by not only comparing the existing knowledge, but also with the development of the digital technologies, especially with ChatGPT and so on. If we give the question that student can find in the ChatGPT, definitely that will be easy way for them to learn, and they won't be responsible in their learning. So for me, that's how I believe, yeah.
Okay. I think no more questions in a chat box.
Yes, sir.
Would be a good idea.
Yeah, one question. I think.
Ms. Salma madam has asked one question.
Okay.
Would it be a good idea to take impromptu project?
Impromptu project for class?
Yes.
Okay. I think for the project-based assessment, we must involve very detailed explanation and very detailed planning. And if we say about impromptu project, it could be class activity. It's an impromptu, it's short activity, but that is not really the nature of project-based learning, which allow long term of learning, for example, like 5 weeks, 6 weeks, or 9 weeks. But again, when there is a project, active learning activity is definitely will benefit the student, but the benefit will be different between long-term project and the short-term project. But still, project active learning normally benefits students because they will be involved and responsible to take charge of the learning.
Okay.
Yes. So I think.
Yes, sir. You are requested to conclude, sir.
Yeah. If any more questions, definitely we can communicate with Dr. Ida. Definitely she will.
One just last request, if you permit, Dr. Magar.
Yeah, please.
Either if you could share with the group, if you have published any of these work outside, as well as any assessment modules or formats would you have, that would really give us some good insights, if at all that's possible. We can share with the participants if that is.
Thank you. I will share that because I have just published one paper on responsible learners through project-based learning this year. So I will share the link.
Please do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sharik. I sincerely thank Dr. Ida for wonderful session, very informative session, and very content and finished on time, and answered all the doubts and questions of the dear participants, and will be definitely communicate to you any more questions to you. Thank you very much for spending time with us and accepting our invitation as a keynote speaker on this very important topic. Thank you, Dr. Ida.
Most welcome.
Yeah. Professor Abu Sufyan, over to you.
Oh, sure, sir. So once again, I thanks Dr. Ida for your very fruitful and comprehensive session. You have covered almost all the aspects of responsible learnings, and thank you for sparing your valuable time. I also thanks to Dr. Rajendra Magar for flawlessly facilitating today's keynote address and chairing this session. We are done with today's morning session. Feedback come attendance form for morning session. It is released in a chat box. We want you to take maximum benefit from this conference, and hence we have made a soft compulsion to have 80% active attendance compulsory for being eligible for conference certificate. Attendance come feedback form, it is already released. You please go through that and fill it. It will be active just for 10 minutes. You are requested to quickly fill the form. Today afternoon, we have very exciting oral presentations which will run parallelly in 2 tracks from total 20 innovative teachers across the world. It will start sharp at 2 p.m. So it depends on your interest and the respective schedule of paper presenter. You can join respective Zoom meeting link. So let's have a quick break and resume next session with the Zoom meeting link that will be shared in a WhatsApp group. Thank you, everyone.